of Allegiance.
To the flag, United States of America, and to the republic which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. I want to let you know that we had a closed session before this meeting, so my apologies. We're starting a bit later than we normally would like to, and a little bit normally than we have been scheduled to. But again, we had some business to take care of prior to the meeting. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the clerk and ask her to call roll, please.
Ms. Connolly? Here. Mr. Duncan?
Here.
Ms. Hardy?
Here.
Ms. Leanne?
Here.
Ms. Shawn Tiscott?
Here.
Mr. Snyder?
Here.
And Mayor Tarter.
Here.
Thank you, Council.
All right, thank you very much. Let's move on to the meeting agenda. We have a motion regarding the meeting agenda.
Mr. Mayor, move to adopt the meeting agenda.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed, abstentions, the ayes have it. I don't see any proclamations or special presentations. Is that right, Madam Clerk?
There are none.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to oaths of office. Are there any oaths of office to administer tonight?
Not that I'm aware of, unless there's someone here to take an oath.
All right,
I
doesn't
don't
look
see
like
any.
it. Let's keep going then. Move on to the summary of written comments. Would you be so kind as to read those, please?
We have a pretty short one this time. Sandy Tarpinian wrote to oppose mature tree removal for residential redevelopment. Andrew Olison wrote in support of bicycle infrastructure and funding and provided suggestions for use of the funds. Tom Moffett, president of the Steeples Court HOA, and Jameson Sites wrote to oppose the location of the Northwest Street Capital Bike Share location. And Margaret Schwartz provided comments on issues with recent work done by Fairfax Water, noting sidewalk obstructions. She requested zoning enforcement of the removal of overgrown vegetation blocking sidewalks, and she asked that the sidewalk from the southeast corner of Lincoln and Great Falls be extended southward. And that's it.
All right, thank you very much. Let's move on now to the receipt of public comment. That's for people in the room right now. I know we've gotten 2 speakers already. The clerk's going to call them shortly, or call you shortly. We would ask if you could please state your name and address for the record and keep your comments to 3 minutes so that all can speak. If you haven't signed up, you're certainly welcome to do so now. The speakers' slips are in the hall or in the foyer there. Please feel free to pick one up, fill it out, and hand it to the clerk. Madam Clerk, will you go ahead and call the first speaker?
The first speaker we have is Andrew Olison.
All right, welcome.
After several weeks of having met with almost all of you in various forms, but I come tonight with my Bike Falls Church hat on, and we've got some of our other members here with me tonight. Bike Falls Church is now almost 100 people in Falls Church City and a few people in the surrounding jurisdictions. And we're a group that believes that Falls Church can be one of the best places for bicycling for transportation in the country. It can be a place where we solve many of our climate issues, our pollution issues, our health issues, our parking and traffic issues, our development issues through bicycling for transportation for people of all ages, abilities, and socioeconomic backgrounds. This is not an extreme position by any means. We have members on CACT, ESC, and Planning Commission, and probably some others I'm not yet aware of. Other cities have done this and they become more attractive to residents, they become more attractive to businesses, they see more diverse people out using bicycles when they build proper infrastructure that's built for all ages and abilities, and they put the time and effort into developing the culture to support it, classes, education, events. And there's good metrics for these types of things. It's not expensive. The Bike Master Plan itself cites $250,000 to complete it. Probably, we've got some inflation now, so maybe a bit more than that. But if you think about the cost of running a city school bus for a student's lifetime, or the cost of building an underground parking garage spot, bike lanes are very cheap. Also, in talking to you all, I think there's a lot of support for this. In talking to my neighbors, I think there's a lot of support. And reminded of a story that my brother told me about a city in Massachusetts where they surveyed members of council and asked them, do you support bike infrastructure and bike culture? And they said, yes, I do, but you don't need to convince me. But do you think your other council members do? And they said, no, I'm the only one really. Do you think your constituents do? No, not really. every single person said the same thing. And I think we have a bit of the same here. I think a lot of the population wants to see their kids be able to bike to school safely, wants to be able to get around, get to shops, get to restaurants, get to events safely on their bicycles, but don't feel comfortable doing that because most people aren't the sort of racers that are going up and down the WNOD. Most people, just want to get out with their kids and go buy groceries. And so I've talked to everyone but Councilmember Leon, so maybe you're the one I need to convince. But everyone else I've talked to, super supportive, super interested. We've gone on walks together. We've talked about particular projects together. I think, Mayor, at Bike to Work Day, you put it very well that we all agree this. We just need to go do it. So at the beginning of the fiscal year here, I just asked that anytime there's a conversation about transportation, bring up bicycles. Too often we just ignore that and just get off talking about EV chargers. Live up to our bicycle master plan. There's good stuff in there. We're not doing it. And put this in the work plan of the budget. We're happy to help with that.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you for your efforts. Madam Clerk, the next speaker.
Our next speaker is Joseph Shurizi.
Hello. Also, here to talk a little bit about bike lanes. My name is Joseph Shurizi of Gundry Drive, and my comments this evening do not represent any organization. They're just from me. There's a lot of really great work being done by city staff and contractors on planning what's going to happen on Park Street and what's going to happen for new street paving that we're looking at. Should we put in one lane of bike lane? Should we have one lane of parking and a one direction bike lane? And I really just want to stress some comments that I've made to several members of City Council this week already was, we had this really awesome parade for Memorial Day last month where we had huge thousands of people out on the streets on Park Street. And even despite the huge crowds, the street being open for people and closed to cars, there were still empty parking spaces in the lots along the street, between here and where Founders Row is. There's still lots that are open and have plenty of space, and there's really no shortage of parking if we're being honest about how we want to use this space. And when people are outside walking and biking to get around, there's no need to have so much extra on-street parking. It's absurd to allow public space to be used for private possession storage the way that it is right now. I think that that's a really good reason for 2 lanes of bike lanes, and I think that should be a top priority in all of our transportation planning for the city to really have a very strong bicycle infrastructure to make Falls Church not just a great place to bike through if you're one of the more than 4 million people taking trips on the WOD trail in a year, but to make Falls Church a great place to bike around, to support our schools with kids getting to school safely on their bikes instead of needing to rely on cars. One less car on the road, that much less emissions and that much safer. So the current plan is, in planning stages, and the truth is it does not take 4 years to replace a parking space with a protected bike lane. That takes a couple hours. And we don't necessarily have to wait to repave the entire road to put up some barriers on the edges of it, even on just one side this summer. I would really like to see something, if this council is taking, the 100 people that have already signed up for Bike Falls Church advocacy seriously, let's see something this summer. It doesn't matter what it is or how small it is or if it's even just one block just to see if people like it. Let's see something this summer. Why wait 4 years for someone to get hurt? Why wait 4 years? Why wait this long for a kid to get hurt on their way to school? Why wait for us to get too far behind on our emissions and transportation goals? Let's try something now and put the money and the staff time aside for it now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other speakers, Madam Clerk?
Those are the only speaker slips we have. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you to our bikers here. Well, I think all of us share the sentiment and look forward to making progress on that issue. So let's go on to council requests. Are there any council requests? Mr. Duncan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of things arose from the Economic Development Committee meeting last week that I just wanted to bring to the manager's attention. Excuse me. One of the topics was the space in the Kensington building, formerly occupied by the Famille Restaurant, which has been announced as a new event space. Questions were raised about whether that meets the stipulations of the special exception that got that building approved, so I'd appreciate some administrative and legal, perhaps, answer to the question of the proposed use that is circulating around in the media, if that is compliant with the SE language that we agreed upon when Kensington was approved. And the second is the situation in Westmoreland Street, about which we're all very familiar. And there's been a good bit of email communication about it, some photos exchanged. Just want to make sure we stay on top of that, and if there's a enforcement element that would help address the issues there about parking of residents and businesses before we even put up more signs. I'd like to get some information on that by the time we all get together here next. I think that's all for now.
All right, Vice Mayor Connolly. I'm sorry, Vice Mayor Hardy, I apologize.
It's okay, thank you.
Yeah, yeah, sure, sorry.
Yeah, so I had those two items from Phil as well on the Kensington. I want to make sure we can follow up and enforce the proffer before any business opens up. I hate to have them open and then for us to follow up with them. So let's make sure that we get a timely response on that. And then Westmoreland, while we were talking about bikes, we had talked about kind of walking tour dates and perhaps launching it as a series. And I think we talked about Park Avenue is probably maybe the good first candidate spot for that. Could you circle back with council on how schedules look for when we can schedule that first one? And potentially the second one I would propose is maybe the South Washington, South Maple area, given all the improvements that are almost ready. And then the second item, which is related to several of the public comments we received about the bike share location from Founders Row 1, why that was moved. Do you have more context on why it was moved, and then what other options are there beyond the one that's proposed in front of the Steeples Court residences?
Thank you. I was going to address that during the manager's report, so maybe I'll gather up all the council requests and try to respond to as many of them as I can tonight.
All right, anything else, Ms. Hardy? Mr. Snyder?
Sure. I wonder if you could address Lincoln Avenue and the transportation projects there. Thank you.
Other council requests? Ms. Connolly and then Ms. Leon?
Yeah, I'll just reiterate Mr. Duncan's request about Westmoreland Street. What's the strategy there? That's been ongoing for quite a while. And then just an update on how the Greenway Downs traffic calming neighborhood program is going. We haven't heard much about that. Thanks.
Ms. Leon?
Yeah, only comment in addition is Westmoreland. We've received a lot of neighbor input with a lot of pictures and photos, and I think we definitely want to be responsive to at least getting back to them on where we are in this process. Thank you.
All right, I think you've got it. Why don't we go on unless there's any other council requests? We do have an annual report of the ESC. So welcome back, long time no see. Thank you for joining us, your participation and your leadership.
I can do that. Okay, thank you. Good evening. I'm Joseph Shirizzi, the chair of the Environmental Sustainability Council for the City of Falls Church. I'd like to thank Mr. Mayor and the rest of this esteemed council for the chance to present the ESC yearly report. The ESC is tasked with addressing the city's impact on climate, air and energy, stormwater and streams, urban forestry and biodiversity, consumption and waste, and community involvement in each of these. We are currently supported by the Energy Transition Subcommittee, the ETS, led by John Ward, the Habitat Restoration Task Group, led by Amy Crumpton, and the Education Task Group, which runs Operation Earthwatch, led by Naomi Goodwin. Membership in these subcommittees is open to any city resident, and the city is currently searching for a new staff liaison. Over the last year, the ESC has advised and supported the city in several ways. We successfully advocated for many improvements in several different zoning special exceptions, including supporting LEED Gold standards, minimum 20% energy improvements, and many other improvements in these projects that we've been talking to developers about. We provided input to the Recreation and Parks Advisory Board on the Park Master Plan for the Fellows property. At the request of City Council, the ESC conducted a review of the equity impacts of our duties and of the City Council work plan. We reviewed FCCPS strategic plan. We provided recommendations to the City Council and the Legislative Committee on state legislation related to the environment that's being passed. Personally, I believe that we will be more effective at our advocacy, which is one of the main things that we've been doing, when we help write city policy as opposed to making comments late in the processes. For example, instead of making comments late in the planning process for these special exception projects, we should have a modern green building policy that standardizes the asks from the city. And I'd like to thank this council for continuing to ask and take our feedback on recommendations on city plans. So the green building policy and several other plans are in the works right now. To help us achieve these goals and help us achieve that, our goals for the next year are to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, the largest portion of which currently comes from transportation and cars, which is why all the bike stuff is really is very important and has a huge impact on the world. To support sustainability in the built environment, to continue to work on climate change mitigation energy action plan, work with the Urban Forestry Commission on green space issues in the city, advocate for stormwater management updates that use modern rainwater projections, and support a new solid waste management plan. We'd like to continue Operation Earthwatch and also need to find new volunteer leaders for it. The ESC looks forward to working with City Council and city staff to help Falls Church develop sustainably in a way that allows us to meet the needs of today without compromising those of tomorrow, which is the definition of sustainability. The last kind of thing that I'd like to just note quickly this evening is that this week the U.S. Supreme Court is expected to completely gut the Environmental Protection Agency in EPA versus West Virginia this week. This will effectively stop the federal government from regulating things which protect the environment, including carbon emissions, and the ball will suddenly be in the court of cities and towns, just like Falls Church, to protect the environment locally and to drastically cut our carbon emissions. Overnight, mayors and city councils across the United States will become the most powerful bodies in our fight against climate change and for sustainable living. With great power comes great responsibility. Falls Church has an opportunity to become a leader in sustainability, and the ESC looks forward to working towards that reality. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
All right, well, thank you so much, and thank you for your leadership and your group's leadership in these important areas, and we appreciate the passion I think that you all bring to this critical issue right now. Let's open it up to questions or comments from my colleagues. Do people have any questions or comments? Mr. Duncan?
Just I want to thank you for all your, so it's always great to see you here at our meetings.
Sure, thank you.
Appreciate the expertise and passion that you bring to it. I think you said you're not a driver, right? Is that?
I do not have a driver's license, no.
Yeah, right. Reminds me of one of the greatest citizens in the city, Charles Langalis, who was seriously visually impaired. was on the Transportation Committee with me back in the late 80s and early 90s, and was really one of the first voices to make us aware of, the failures or shortcomings in our sidewalk infrastructure, because Charles, relied on his feet to get everywhere. He was a very accomplished guy. Anyway, that's just an aside. I wonder if you all have talked much about some of the other jurisdictions that have leaned into public transit buses, particularly trying to connect up the kids on the way to school and back from school using the pre-existing infrastructure that we've invested in of the city buses. Is that a topic that seems to have any potential or promise here in Falls Church?
Specifically, we haven't had a discussion about school buses, but about 3 months ago, we had an entire ESC evening meeting that was, attended by about 50 people I've spoken to about to this council before. And one of the major topics in bike infrastructure and sustainable transportation is getting our kids to school safely in a way that gives them freedom and that does not necessarily rely on a huge, long line of cars. So I think there's room for innovation there. I think there's, different jurisdictions. We're constantly comparing ourselves to Arlington and, other counties in the area that are setting standards. And there's certainly more that we could do to keep up with other leading cities in the region in terms of sustainability and specifically transportation.
Good. Okay. Yeah, I'd encourage you. I think it was Alexandria that introduced some sort of measure that basically gives kids passes to ride the metro buses, which are as we said already coursing the roads and need to be more utilized, particularly in a small jurisdiction like Falls Church, where you can get across town within 10 or 12 minutes on a city bus,
Sure.
no matter what the weather is or what the traffic conditions are. Okay,
I
thanks.
take it often, and I think that is a great idea I would support.
Okay, thanks.
Ms. Hiscott?
Thanks, and I'd like to thank Joseph and everybody who's worked on the ESC. I think if you go back to your opening statements of what all the ESC supports, the depth and the breadth of the topics that are addressed in monthly meetings and the expertise within our residents and those of whom are members of the ESC is really incredible. We as a council cover hundreds of topics in every given meeting, and I think it's incredibly important for the ESC to bring their expertise to the council and bring us your ideas and bring us, the roadmap to really help us through this. I think, it's frightening to think about all the things that are changing from the Supreme Court, and, I'm quite frankly overwhelmed with the responsibility of taking that on as a town when we have currently one staff member, a coordinator assigned to sustainability. I think that as we look to our next year's budget, as we're guided from our climate action plans, I think we need to be prepared to be investing a lot more of our staffing and our budget towards this area, especially if we're going to be taking on more responsibility for it that the federal government is abdicating, in my opinion. So I also wanted to make sure that we're including our ESC members in our climate action plan development. I know we've talked about that. It's pretty important that those who already have expertise in this area and in our specific city work with those professionals to develop what's best for us and to develop an accessible and actionable plan that we can actually carry out and not just have it as a pie in the sky, we'd like to reduce by X. Well, how are we going to get there? We really need this plan. I can't wait to see it implemented. Thanks to those who've worked on providing input. Thanks to Cindy for picking that up in the meantime. But these are really critical things that we are currently understaffing and not addressing to the extent I think we should. And I take some responsibility for that, being the council liaison to the ESC. Don't have the experience that my predecessor did, but I certainly have the passion, and I'm invigorated by those like Joseph who do, and really take seriously our responsibility to our city and to the region. So thank you.
Ms. Connolly?
Yeah, thank you, Joseph, for all your work and expertise and passion that you bring to this work. And as Mrs. Scott said, thanks for calling attention to the fact that the EPA is on the chopping block this week. So we do take that very seriously. So this question is more for Mr. Shields, but ties in with the ESC. You've listed your 6 goals for the year. One of the things that's really important to me is that the goals of the ESC tie into the work plan of the City Council and the work of the staff and the work of the ESC, so that we're all trying to do the same thing and not doing different things. Because really, when I talked to Mr. Olson last week, we agreed that if it's not in the work plan, it's not going to get done. So as we go through the work plan planning, I would really like to be able to coordinate with the ESC to be able to see where these things fit into the work plan. And if they don't fit in this year, do they fit in next year? Because this is super ambitious and you need a lot of staff work to get this done, tied in with everything else. So we just want to make sure that it's all going to happen and flow naturally so that the work of the ESC is advising the council and the work of the council is supporting what the ESC is doing. So as we go through this, I think the next step with the work plan is to figure out what all the things we're doing and then ask our boards and commissions to take a look at it and see that their work is reflected in what we're trying to do. Right? Does that make sense?
It does. I think that discussion back and forth between the city council and its boards and commissions is really crucial. The city staff do look very closely at the council work plan as the signal of major areas of change for the city. And so it is very important for our staff to have our boards and commissions aligned with those as well. And so I think with the annual report from the ESC that can feed in, but the council does need to then sort of sort through to make decisions in terms of what the top priorities are for the 2-year period. And because it's not forever, but it is kind of what's the here and now of what we'll try to get accomplished in our as we make progress towards all these goals.
Thank you for that question and prioritization, Councilwoman. Can I just add one thing to that? I've been the chair of the ESC for more than 6 months now. I've never had any city staff member besides Charles, the city forester, reach out to me. I've never had any meeting with the city manager or any city planners around any of the issues that I've been advocating for. And I've never been told that, we have X amount of budget for some project. How can we use that most effectively besides making comments on the zoning special exceptions? So, the ESC doesn't have a budget. We've never been told we have this much money to work on any of these goals. And the goals are mostly the same as they were last year and that they were the year before.
So I think it's really important that you will hear from us soon as we go through the next phase of the work plan to be able to see where all those things jive together.
Looking forward to
Thanks.
it. Thank you.
Mr. Snyder?
Sure, thanks a lot. It seems to me the critical role that you're playing is really good. I think you laid out, for example, the region voted to reduce greenhouse gases by 50% by the year 2030. That's going to take a lot of specific steps. So your best advice and the expertise on the ESC about the different things, and you've mentioned bike facilities, and that's clearly got to be a part of addressing it, but the other elements, the bus rapid transit on 7, for example, and micro transit, other elements like that. We really need your thoughts and your best advice on how we get from point A to point B, if you will. So thank you.
Vice Mayor Hardy?
Thank you. I wanted to put a +1 next to what Debbie proposed around making sure you have the right resources and the city has the right resources. Out of everything in your 4-page annual report, on page 2, I wanted to call out the city is currently not on track to meet our goals or the regional greenhouse gas emission goals. And so that needs to be kind of crisis mode for us. We need to look really hard at ourselves of whether we're investing the right resources to tackle all that. And so while you've got the mic, kind of dovetailing what Mr. Snyder just asked, while you have everyone's attention, like what are the top 5 things individuals should do besides bike and not drive a car to help support us towards that goal?
Yes, many studies have shown that public policy is more impactful than anything an individual is going to do. And those specific goals are not for how can the individuals in Falls Church cut their own emissions. This is for the region, right, which is big picture. And there are 3 line items on that on the study in 2015 showing that Falls Church, where it needs to reduce its emissions by 50%, have raised them 3%. Right, so we're going in the wrong direction. And the 3 areas where carbon emissions are broken down is residential, commercial space, and transportation. Transportation is the largest by far, and it is dominated by 85% of our transportation emissions are cars. So it needs to be inconvenient to drive, and it needs to be convenient and safe to for citizens in Falls Church to be able to go about their daily needs, go to the library, go to their school, get their groceries, and whatever else that they need to do, and be able to do that without needing cars that burn gasoline. And if we did that, if we had safe bike infrastructure and other ways for people of all abilities to get around town without cars, it would be less congestion and less pollution in our town, and we would hit our goals. Most car trips in America these days are less than 3 miles. The majority of trips that Americans take are short distances that could be replaced with walking and biking and micromobility. And that also is determined by how far away you need to go to have your needs met. We're a very unique city where we have enough density in a very small area that if we plan well and we design our city well and increase our density and allow mixed use buildings and allow people to start businesses from their homes and really change how our very old and outdated zoning laws work, we can change how people go about their days and how people interact with the built environment, which is one of our goals. So I think bike lanes, start there. If you want discrete tasks, number 1, put a bike lane on Park Street. July, this month, we can do it. We have the ability to do that. It's not hard. We know how to build bike lanes. It's not an engineering feat. Right? It's very easy. That will have huge long-term ramifications for the city. And if you just continue to do that and make the infrastructure safe, more people will bike, and that will have very large long-term impacts. The other one is the heating and cooling of residential and commercial spaces is the second largest sub-line item for emissions in Falls Church and in the region. So there's some interesting things that we could be doing for winterizing and making building codes, and as more buildings go up here, combating heat island effects, which we have also advocated for in all the special exception zoning changes. So those are, very discrete things. If we did that to 100% of our ability over the next 12 months, we would hit our goals. But the way that we're moving and the way how slow progress is happening, we're not going to. So, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to put you on the spot. I think I asked that mostly because while climate change feels like a huge, daunting kind of existential problem, I think the fact that you've pulled out things that are very tangible means that these are things we can do. If we're willing to invest in them, we are able to do them.
That's right, that we have to do, yes.
And the expense is not overwhelming.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I look forward to hearing more from you and the ESC, and we'll be speaking, I'm sure, very soon. So thank you.
Great, thank you all.
Let's move on to the report of the city manager, Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mayor Tarter. I will go kind of rapid fire through a number of things to report out. And I'll start with the Independence Day, which is coming up next week. The 4th of July is on Monday. And we will celebrate in the city in the following ways. On Sunday, July 3rd, we will have a scavenger hunt in city parks. And at 5 p.m., we'll be hosting the Marine Corps Band, and they will be playing in Cherry Hill Park. That's at 5 p.m. And then on Monday, July 4th, Independence Day at noon, VPIS will be hosting right here in council chambers the reading of the Declaration of Independence and other founding documents of the city. So all are welcome, and I look forward to that celebration in the city. We will not have the fireworks this year. We are not able to shoot the fireworks up at the high school site with the construction layout of the new school, but we do appreciate all of the efforts by the school staff, as well as Fire Marshal and Rec and Parks, to try to figure out ways to make that work, but that is not possible with the current configuration. I want to shift now to the General Assembly, and I don't want to steal Cindy Mester's thunder, but I'll just hit a few highlights. The governor has now signed the budget, and there are a couple of things that are noteworthy. One, we spoke a lot about the grocery tax through the budget process, and the General Assembly did protect the 1% local option for grocery tax receipts. That funds police, teacher salaries, core government services, and it is also something that I think local governments value in terms of their ability to chart our own destiny in terms of economic development efforts, and so we do appreciate the leadership of our Senator Dick Saslaw and our delegate Simon in supporting that and holding that position, which the city did advocate for, along with the Virginia Municipal League and the Virginia Association of Counties. It is something we'll have to watch very closely coming up in future sessions. The other notable things in this budget is that the General Assembly and the governor have approved $4 million for the city for stormwater and flooding mitigation. I want to thank in particular Senator Dick Saslaw, who did put in that budget amendment, and that will save city taxpayers and city stormwater fee ratepayers hundreds of dollars as we carry out the capital improvements programs to try to mitigate flooding in the city. So we want to thank Senator Saslaw for that, and for the support by Delegate Simon as well. That $4 million does come in addition to the past 2 years. There have really been significant things that the Virginia government has approved for the city, specific to the city, and that includes the $10 million Transportation Smart Cities grant, which we're working on with Virginia Tech, and that's to apply new innovative technologies in the West Falls metro area. And secondly, Dick Saslaw's amendment to the budget 2 years ago freed up $7 million for affordable housing, and the City Council will be considering actions related to those later on tonight. So these are very significant and transformative things that the work that Senator Saslaw and his colleagues in the General Assembly have supported that are very beneficial for the taxpayers of the City of Falls Church. A couple other things that I would note just in my report in response to some of the questions tonight, and I'll just go quickly through these and can provide more detail. For Westmoreland Street, we have been working with the neighbors there. We did get a note out to them today just to ask for a little bit more time. We're working on a proposal in response to their petition. We are also stepping up enforcement of the existing regulations, and with that, the police are providing city planning staff with data to help make sure that our new proposed parking regulations on that street are responsive to what the data that our police are collecting in their enforcement efforts. The basic approach that we do plan to communicate with the residents is to uphold the policy that's enshrined in the city code of allowing 2-hour parking during certain times of the day, but also have other times of the day where it would be resident-only parking. So we want to work through that with the neighbors, and we'll be communicating that proposal in detail this week. With respect to the bike share, Capital Bike Share location, a letter from city planning staff did go out to adjacent neighbors on Northwest Street, indicating that our intention is to take approximately 2 to 3 parking spaces on West Street in order to move the bike station that was originally planned right on the sidewalk next to Founders Row 1, to move it to that location. And the reason for that is that those are all solar-powered stations, and at that location, there's not enough hours of daylight to actually power the station. We worked with Founders Row on other options to have solar panels located elsewhere but wired to that station, and Capital Bike Share was not able to agree to that or have that work. We've sought other locations. One thing that is notable is that the Northern Virginia Park Authority does not allow Capital Bike Share stations on its property anywhere along the 40-mile stretch of the park, and they've been consistent with us for years in saying we cannot site a station there. So we do think that that location on West Street is the best location to serve the Founders Row project and to serve a very high cycling use area of the city. We think that will be a very highly used station, and we are eager to get that station set so that it can be used. And I will note also that Founders Row is paying for that station for the operation of that standard, which is the city's standard request of any development in the city, that there is support for those stations going forward. We will continue to work with the neighbors who have contacted us just to see if there aren't any tweaks to the location to minimize any adverse impacts. But we have tried to find the best location. We don't have a better idea at the present time for where that could go. So we would like to proceed with that, but again, we will work with the neighbors to address concerns to the best extent that we're able to. Moving then to, we'll follow up on the space at the Kensington. I know that that's in process. On Lincoln Avenue, I'll just note the following. One, in terms of the greening of Lincoln project, we're in the final procurement stages of hiring our design and engineering team for both the stormwater and the traffic calming measures for Lincoln. We wanted to get that team on board, and then we will engage in the conceptual planning process and engage with the neighbors in that conceptual planning process, and move through that with the neighborhood. So I think very shortly we'll be getting word out to the neighbors that process will start once we have that engineering contract completed. And then lastly, just for an update on Greenway Downs, I can follow up with City Council on that unless Cindy Mester, I don't know if you have any updates on the progress of the Greenway Downs traffic calming project.
I could do initial, and then we could do a follow-up. We have received comments from all the working groups and have consolidated that, completed a staff review, and are now working with the consultant to adjust and revise any plans based on that feedback. And then that'll be, I think, another 2 to 3 weeks, and then we'll be updating the working group and proceeding with VDOT review and approval. So far, still on schedule. We're sort of in a little lull as we review all the comments in terms of public outreach, but we're doing internal work.
So that's the end of
And
my
what's
report for
the
tonight.
timing on that one, Cindy?
I'd like to get back to you so I don't misspeak the timing, since we've got a couple projects underway.
One thing that is part of the timing is that once we do have our plans set, we have to send them to VDOT for their review, and that sometimes takes months. But
Questions, Vice Mayor Conley?
Hardy.
I'm sorry. Vice Mayor, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Why, good news on the $4 million. I had forgotten about that request we had put into Senator Saslaw. That is big news. Is that going towards the big 6 projects we've already identified, or does that mean we get to accelerate any of the stormwater things that we didn't yet fund?
So the top priority would be the big 6, but because we have put ARPA dollars towards a good number of those big 6, I think there will be additional. So we'll need to run that through our capital improvements planning process, but the intent is to stick with the top priorities. We do also have the round of green infrastructure projects that was identified, and so those would be eligible for these grant funds as well.
And I will note, because we were optimistic in the outcome of the General Assembly session, although it took longer, the CIP that Council has adopted anticipated that $4 million, so it's already budgeted and appropriated. So once we get the paperwork with the state, we'll be able to proceed. And it was based on what you indicated, Mr. Shield, the 6 priorities and the next round of sort of greening ones.
Great, good news. And then on Westmoreland, so it's good to hear we're going to step up enforcement of some of the parking infractions we're seeing there. One point I would make is that I would love to make sure we have a more consistent policy on parking. So just on Park Avenue itself, when I was surveying what our 2-hour policy is, I found 3 different signs. And I don't want to create kind of a 4th or 5th or 10th iteration of our parking policy. And so whatever we come up with on Westmoreland, I'd love it to true back to kind of what our standard city policy is, because I think there needs to be a pretty high bar for it to be a variation of that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other comments? Ms. Conley?
Also on West Westmoreland, one of the things was enforcement of people blocking driveways. That seems to be a problem that won't be addressed by just 2-hour parking. So is there additional enforcement that will be added as part of that project?
So the police are conducting kind of enhanced enforcement right now. So if people are experiencing that, they should call the police. They can call 241-5050, the non-emergency line, and we'll send an officer to investigate that.
Other comments from Mr. Shields? I would just speak to the location of the bike share. I got to say, to my mind, it's just like putting a metro station, 3 blocks away from the center of town. It just doesn't work that well. I mean, it really needs to be where the people are, not because you don't have enough light. I mean, that seems like a solvable problem. Can't someone run like a line, a 120 line down there, or do something? I mean, it just seems like one of those things where, somebody someplace, some bureaucratic snafu is causing common sense from prevailing here, but I would strongly encourage putting the bikes where the people are and where the people want to go, as opposed to 3 blocks away where the people don't want it. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents for whatever it might be worth. All right, anything, Ms. Conley?
Could it go in West End Park in that area? Do we look at that? You don't have to answer that, but
Right.
that's just another suggestion. I would agree with Mayor Tarter that it would be better to have them where the people are than in a residential neighborhood.
Well, that's just, I mean, that was the whole idea in approving this, was to have them have that. It was going to be a bike-oriented development. It was going to have less parking because people were able to bike to it. It had high visibility. People were going to be able to see the bike share, and people were going to be attracted to it. I mean, that was kind of part and parcel of the approval, at least to my recollection, or to my mind.
Yes.
And so, sticking it 200 yards away is just, makes no sense to me. So again, I would try to find a solution. I don't know where the solar panel's placed or whether you run a 120 line off of something, but
So the only thing I can say is I know that we fought for that location for a long time with Lyft, and the answer came back conclusively that they were firm that they were not going to do some alternate wiring regime. It is 100 feet away because it's just on the other side of the W&OD. But I will, Carrie's working this. She's trying to find the best location. These things are harder to cite than I think any of us would like. But
I guess so. I just say that, there's some person there who doesn't want to fool with, their solar panel array or something, and then all of a sudden for the next 30 years, people, 30% less people will use this than would otherwise. And talking about getting people off cars, out of cars, and that's part of solving it. It's just common sense solutions. And I feel like this one's not in that ballpark yet. So anyway, other comments or questions for Mr. Shields? All right, let's keep moving. So thank you, Mr. Shields. Let's move on to business on the agenda. Madam Clerk, will you call the first item?
Item 10A1 is TO 22-12, an ordinance to approve conveyance of the real property at 208 South Gibson Street, RPC number 52-309-005, to the City of Falls Church Economic Development Authority in order that the refinancing of a total of 5 EDA-owned Virginia Village properties may occur as part of the Amazon 3 project.
Mr. Shields?
and I'll refer this to Ms. Mester.
Good evening, Council. The item before you, which is the 208 Gibson Street property transfer as related to our Virginia Village Affordable Housing Project, is back before you with council request from staff to request council to approve. The item has not changed from your referral in terms of the core content. I do want to note that the Planning Commission did receive your referral, considered it on June 15th, and has approved by unanimous motion the transfer of this public property so that it is consistent with city code and consistent with the comp plan. So with that, Mayor, I will just do that brief summary, but be glad to provide any additional information or questions.
I'm sorry, are you going to give us additional information, or are you done with your presentation?
I'm done with my presentation. I'll
great.
quit there, be glad to provide any additional
Sure.
response to questions.
All right, we've heard this before. I don't know if people have any additional comments or questions. It looks like people are shaking their heads. I'm going to open it up to public comment. Any public comment on this matter? Seeing none, the matter is closed to the public. Do we have a motion?
Move to adopt TO 22-12.
Second, I just wanted in the staff report to note the change of Shirley Street, which is not, I think, South Shirley.
Surely you just.
Shirley. Stop calling me Shirley.
Thank you, Mr. Duck.
But anyway, lines 15, 16, 17. Thank
All
you.
right. So we have a motion, we have a second. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leon?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
The motion carries. Thank you.
Next item, please.
10A2 is TR 22-28, resolution approving the purchase of the property at 436 Sharrow Avenue, RPC 52-302-020 for an amount not to exceed $788,000 and authorizing the city manager to execute documents necessary for the purchase.
All right, Mr. Shields?
Thank you, Mayor Tarter. The City Council referred this to the Planning Commission 2 weeks ago. The Planning Commission has since considered this acquisition of 436 Sharrow Avenue and has given its recommendation of approval by unanimous vote. I will just note quickly that the property at 436 Sharrow Avenue is adjacent to the Oak Street School, and some of the reasons for acquiring it include it provides the ability to expand some of the outdoor uses associated with the school. It's adjacent to the Cavalier Trail Park and will allow for the expansion and additional buffer for this natural greenway. The house is fully within the Trips Run floodway and the 100-year floodplain and has experienced repeated flood damage. And the property is within the Trips Run resource protection area, which does severely redevelopment its ability to be redeveloped or expanded as a home. So for these are principal reasons the city has sought to acquire the property. It was named in the city's open space acquisition report back in 2005 and has been since affirmed in other planning documents since that time. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right. Any questions or comments from Mr. Shields, Mr. Snyder?
Thanks very much. I know city staff explored alternative funding sources, federal or state grants. Can you report on what you were able to find?
So we have been exploring grants for this, and there are potentials through the Environmental Protection Agency, through FEMA, and through state sources such as the Conservation and Natural Resources grants. We have not, at this point, secured funding for those. We are exploring with those agencies what the process would be for using dollars for acquisition of this property, given the stage of the acquisition that we're in. There is an issue of timing, given the seller's desire to sell and move. So I'm, at this point, not optimistic that we'll be able to use grant funds for this acquisition. However, through these contacts, there are other flood-impacted homes in the city, and so I think what we're learning through this process is potentially beneficial for possibly helping other homeowners that have experienced repeat loss. and so we'll be able to use potentially those resources in the future.
Right.
We've not fully given up on the possibility
So
for
you'll
this site
you'll
as
keep
well.
pursuing that?
That's right.
Even though we're approving this tonight, if there are alternative sources of funding, we'll go after those?
That's
Okay,
right.
Thanks. Second point, I just want to underscore that this is adjacent to a school and adjacent to open space. That point has been made and is very consistent with the priorities that the city has long pursued since the 2005 open space initiative. Thank you.
All right, other questions or comments? Any comments from the public? Seeing none, the matter is closed to the public. I would just say, Mr. Shields, to coordinate with our friends at the schools to make sure we use this property efficiently, not just for stormwater mitigation, but for educational purposes or recreational purposes, to make sure that we're all on board and this property gets as much use as we can get out of it. All right, Ms. Hardy?
I was going to say the same thing, but also actually ask Rec and Parks to take a look at this too, given that it's right next to the park. And I know that this is our second acquisition now in several years, and they've always talked about acquiring open space. And so while we don't need to refer it to them, but let's make sure that they're aware and can chime in with any input. And with that, Mayor, I'd like to move to adopt TR 22-28.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
Ms. Leon on the second. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leanne?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
The motion carries. Thank you.
All right, let's keep going. Next item, please.
10B2 or 10B1, sorry about that, is TR 22-23, resolution to approve the Amazon year 2 homeownership project developer agreement with NHP Foundation and authorize the city manager to execute the agreement on behalf of the city.
Mr. Shields?
Thank you, Mayor Tarter, members of council. We referenced earlier this meeting about the funds that have been available largely due to the efforts of Senator Saslaw, and this is one of those, allowing the city to be eligible to compete for Amazon Reach grants through the Virginia Department of Housing. So what we have here is a $3.4 million grant that would be used for home ownership opportunities, and that grant is being matched by $400,000 of funding through the city's Affordable Housing Fund for a total of a $3.8 million program. What is before the council tonight is authorization for the city manager to execute an agreement with NHP Foundation, an affordable housing organization that has property in the city of Falls Church. Ms. Messer will provide the staff report that lays out some of the details of that arrangement, but the basic idea is for the city, in partnership with NHP, to go out and acquire properties, to rehabilitate them within limits, about a $20,000 cap on rehabilitation, attach covenants to those properties to protect their affordability, and then resell them to clients that are pre-registered and pre-approved through the city's affordable housing program. Our goal is to accomplish 8 properties that would be converted into permanent affordable housing through this program. I want to thank the city attorney who's been working on this with Cindy and with our housing staff. The recommendation tonight from staff is authorization to proceed with this agreement. Ms. Mester.
Thank you, Mr. Shields. City Council, as Mr. Shields indicated, this is one of the 2 Amazon grants we've been working on. We fondly refer to it as year 2, and it has 2 components. Tonight we'll be focusing on the home ownership piece, but as a reminder, there is also a rental covenant extension for the Reed Building, which expires at the end of December. And so an additional $350,000 as part of this grant is targeted for that extension. But as I noted, tonight is the home ownership piece. These grant resources, though, really are adding another toolbox to the City Council to achieve your goals for affordable housing diversity and inclusion. And I think, as we've talked about several things this evening related to the ESC's report and public comments from Bike Falls Church, also really help to live near where you work and reduce greenhouse gas emissions if we can reduce the impact on transportation and the need for vehicles. So I do feel some of these goals are coming together as we look at your overall execution of comp plan and work plan. The homeownership program funding will assist up to 18 households with first-time homebuyer opportunities. It is leveraging using subsidy. The grant will subsidize that purchase, so it does leverage the first-time homebuyer resources predominantly through Virginia Housing, and that will increase the affordability. We already have 19 households on the waiting list from the period in which it was just general conversation with council about submitting the grant and then the award of the grant. So there's definite interest and desire and need. The subsidy will be controlled under restrictive covenants so that we can ensure the affordability, leverage that financing as I indicated, but also over time help those homeowners move up in their wealth from equity in the properties, but also return some of the funds back to the city for a revolving fund to assist additional households as well as some cost recovery. That split is targeted to be a 75-25 equity split, so the homeowner would have 75% and 25% would come back to the city. That was initially proposed at an 80-20, and we've done some additional research based on council's input and questions, and did also consider a 70-30 split. Staff's recommendation is remaining at the 75-25 in the developer agreement that's presented to council. That is to maintain a balance of incentivizing first-time home buyers, but also having some benefit for the city long-term. The developer agreement is also set up to be a minimum of 99 years with the restrictive covenants being finalized. We're still doing some, which would be the prevailing document. There's been research on council's question about whether to make it permanent and not have it end. And so we've been researching that. Predominantly other housing authorities have done the 99 years, so I'm trying to identify with them their rationale for that. In working with our assessor's office for the 99 years, it has no impact on assessed value. Of course, if they do, if the covenant would expire, then on the 99th year, there'd be increased value. So we're weighing all of those, but we would set it at a minimum of 99 years. The developer agreement and the covenant would also allow the city to reduce it at our choice if there was value and benefit to the city to do so. The program also has the partnership with NHP Foundation, as Mr. Shields indicated, and so the specific action before council tonight is the developer agreement that executes that partnership, which is allowable under the cooperative agreement that council has already approved with NHP, but it called out for a special developer agreement that would be program specific. And as Mr. Shields noted, Ms. McCroskey has done a lot of work over the last couple of weeks with us on this, and I appreciate her legal review. The draft that I sent to council this afternoon was the latest version that went to NHP, and just prior to this evening, they were able to complete their review and acknowledge that they are concurring with the majority of all the contents, and they just have a couple fine-tuning of languages to make sure we're all on the same page. So I did want to note that for council. One of the additional changes besides the 99-year and the 75-25 split that were council questions was around the developer fee. And I do want to note for council and the public that the proposed fee now is reduced to 9.5%. As you will recall, that started out under the grant and with the original proposal from NHP to be 12%. A week ago, we were able to negotiate down to 10%, and just today reduced it down to 9.5%. Also in the agreement, we have codified the verbal discussion that NHP, as they've noted in some of the memos they've submitted to council and the Housing Commission, they would pursue additional grants to support this and help us get additional homeowners into the program, either because we've run out of grant money or, as we know, the increased housing costs that are happening now. And with that as an incentive, they could earn additional fees among the grant, but it would be capped at 1.2 million. So it's built in as an incentive so that we can increase homeownership opportunities, but still have a cap. There's some other terms that we were able to clarify as we worked through our city legal review as well as NHP's legal review. So we're clear on things like NHP will proactively identify the units, will proactively work with local realtors in the community. They will assist first-time home buyers to get connected with Virginia Housing, and who will do the formal education as required as part of the first-time home buyer programs. We've clarified income limits, sales price, also whether the city manager or the designee approves certain waivers that are in there. And I guess the last point I would note is that we also clarified who's going to be drafting documents. So per council's input, the city attorney and the city will initiate the drafting of the affordability covenants. In fact, Carol has already started that process, and then, but is not complete tonight. And then the sales agreement will be based on the Virginia Realtor template and modified to reflect the programmatic terms in our covenants. And then there's a quarterly reporting, which we have a basic framework required by Virginia Housing, and we're going to supplement that to make sure we're documenting the use of the grant funds and the terms of this agreement. So as Mr. Shields indicated, our request is for approval of the developer agreement, which would then be finalized per standard final review by city attorney and city manager prior to executing, but will not change content. And the agreement is written that we would amend it with the exhibits I just referenced that are in the final stages. With that, I'll pass the baton back to Mr. Shields and Ms. McCoskey. Anything to add? And of course, we welcome questions.
All right, thank you so much. A lot of work, I think, has gone on, a lot of council work as well. It sounds like we're making some good progress. Whether we're there or not, I don't know. I'll leave that to some of my colleagues. I know there were certainly questions and concerns that have been raised previously. Ms. Leon, looks like you're ready to go.
Yes. Thank you, team, for all the work done on this. I think when it comes back, there's incremental improvement. So I just have a few questions. Cindy, when they agreed to the 9.5%, was there any change to the staffing that they're bringing to the table, especially when we added language that that fee is covering the program implementation staffing and admin costs?
No change to their staffing and their commitment to implement the
So they're not
program.
cutting the staff. They're taking the 9.5%.
Correct.
Other point around, help me understand the cap to 1.2 million. Where are we going with this? We have a goal of 18 units. We've got 3.8 million. So are we saying that if you achieve the 18 units or if you spend the 3.8, you're going to get 1.2? I'd rather incentivize to get the goal of 18, not burn through the 3.2 without meeting the 18 to get to the 1.2
Yeah,
in additional fees.
No,
I just want to make sure it's structured positively.
Sure.
Don't burn the cash too fast. Hit the 18.
Yeah. So the developer agreement specifies a specific goal based on the 3.8 grant of
Yeah.
up to 18 million. So that's required for, and they will only get 9.5% fee when they execute the sale. So there's motivation, besides their moral commitment to the project, they're only going to get paid if they pursue those units. The 9.5% for 18 units is estimated to be about $1 million in the developer fee with doing all 18. The sales price of that house obviously has an impact. The 1.2, the intent of that delta, the additional 200,000, is available to them if they pursue additional grants and bring additional resources to the table. So it has to be above the 3.8 million. That's the already awarded city grant funds.
Okay. So if they bring in 5,000 in additional grants, they automatically get access to the 200,000. Is there a threshold that we want to define? Should we define a threshold for what constitutes access to the 200,000 in additional?
The intent, and I can work with Carol to make sure the language is there, they don't get access to it just because they bring grant money to the table. They need to execute a homeownership transfer, and then the 9.5% would apply.
Got
And
it.
that's can
If I read
increment up to
the way that I'm reading that contract, the way you said it, I understand it, but the way it's written is not clearly the way you said it. So I just help please in making sure that that's very explicit.
Thank you.
The other questions, good to hear that they're going to proactively work with local realtors, right, and community resources to identify the housing stock to purchase. So let's talk about the purchase price limits for a second. I'm unclear what it is. Is it 550 or is it 550 plus the 170K? What is the purchase price limit that Virginia Housing is putting forth under their rubric?
Their core sales price is the 550. There are some exceptions that they will allow up to, right now it's 170,000. So it could go above that. The way we've written the agreement is, though, the 550 is the sales price, and they can only go above, consistent with Virginia housing requirements and approved by the city manager as designee. So the city has input into that. It's a balance of getting units available and as low income as possible to marry the
Yep.
purchaser
I'm a
with the
proponent
unit.
of larger purchase limits. It helps us, right? It gives us more flexibility. What is unclear in this agreement is what triggers the line of 170K additional to the 550. So there's benefit to cite that in the agreement. One, so council can understand what triggers the additional access to 170K in that purchase price limit. And if there's a way to work with Virginia Housing, right, instead of making this an exception-based thing, you know, greasing the wheels for efficiency a little bit to say, hey, can we remove the exception, right, and can we just have 550 plus 170K purchase price limit? Like raising, if they're going to allow it for a few, I think the question is, do we need the exception? Can you just make the purchase price limit higher, you know, to include the 170?
Glad to explore it. I anticipate the answer will be no, because they adopt their sales price,
Yeah.
you know, by their board for all projects and then have this other option. But
If that answer
certainly
is
will
no,
inquire.
understood, but can we please specify what triggers the ability, right, to go above that 550? It's unclear to me, and I think we would all like to understand what drives the purchase price limit exception. Right. From an accountability perspective, I know, Wyatt, you approve a lot of things. The way this agreement is structured is it references not so much a role, it references on one side the city will be required to approve. On one side, I see instances of it requires city manager approval. So just making sure we're very consistent on who is the role that approves this. I don't see Dana's name anywhere on here, and I think she's the director of housing. So I think my question is, who is the person responsible for the day-to-day ins and outs of transacting and working with an HP? Who's accountable is different than who's responsible. So I'm a little confused when I read this agreement and would probably benefit from that specificity. I think other readers would too, not just me. Thoughts on that?
So generically, we typically would say something that doesn't need to go to the city
Yep.
council for approval.
To you.
It goes to the city manager.
Okay.
And the city manager is accountable to the city council. So if we sign off on something the city council doesn't like, you're not sort of digging deep in the organization with somebody you're displeased with. The person that's directly accountable is the person who's named. As a practical matter, it's going to be the housing staff that are going to be administering this agreement. And so if there are things that the city needs to sign off on, I would only do so with the advice of the housing staff, but it ultimately would come for my signature if that's what the agreement states.
Okay. So I think my recommendation is, for efficiency's sake, right? Like, we're talking tight timelines. We're saying, NHP will provide the city 10 days notice of X, 7 days notice of Y, 5 days notice of Z. I think it'll help to understand who's reviewing these requests, what's requiring approval, and leveraging where necessary, citing, it's the housing staff. I just want to make sure that when we put out these agreements, they're smartly written, they're specific and measurably enough that when you read it, it's also clear as to what you need to do to invoke what's written or codified in the agreement. Does that make sense?
And if I could just add those good points, and I appreciated our earlier discussion on that. So I did try to accommodate that in that the agreement starts off defining the city. So the city is the party, city council, the city as a whole is the legal party to this agreement. And so there are places that still reference the city because the city will be the one that could withdraw the funds or close down the program. And that's a pretty big policy decision. But then throughout the document, when it talks about administering, then instead of having city throughout, I went back through and put city manager or designee. And a lot of those waivers and policy decisions should be the city manager, as Mr. Shields indicated, because he's accountable to city council, but he's going to need his designee, his housing director, housing staff to research and recommend. And the actual implementation, of course, day to day would be. So that's the way I tried to respond to that and the way we sort of lay it out in an agreement. It's not an administrative manual or a document. And with that, I'll pause and see if Ms. McCoskey has anything to add for.
Yeah, I would just add that in the general provisions near the end of the agreement, there is a place for any notices to be given. And so the notice, it would say, and in this case, we would probably say that the notice will be sent to the name and address of the Director of Housing as well as the name and address of the manager. And then the Director of Housing would normally do it as the manager's designee, but that's how we make clear that the right person gets the information for a quick turnaround, is there's a specific location in the document where all notices must be sent.
And that is on page 14, and you'll see that the city manager and the human services director are annotated.
Are annotated there? Okay. Let's talk about the denominator for the 9.5%. So it's comprised of 4 components. Clear on the purchase price. I think we just need to talk through this $550 or the limits there. But purchase price, the rehab work, and then this notion of carrying costs. The carrying cost excludes the rehab work, correct? I just want to make sure that we're going to benefit from specifying so it is not double dipping what constitutes each of those 4 buckets that comprise the denominator to the 9.5%, right? So I'm focused on carrying costs and closing costs. We cite closing costs, but there's 2 ends to that, right? The buyer and the seller. I think we're going to benefit by specifying on the initial purchase, we're only paying for, what goes into that denominator? It's just the buyer-seller cost, right? Which parts of the closing costs? We need to factor in both sides to make sure that it's not confusing, right? Because we should not be paying both seller and buyer selling costs should not be included in the denominator, is my view. Does that make sense, Cindy?
Yes, and you're talking about the initial one plus the
Yes,
secondary
yes.
resale.
So in my mind, when we talk about closing costs, what the language doesn't cite in the agreement, the language in the agreement should cite that it's, on the initial purchase, it's the buyer selling, the buyer closing costs. In the resale, it's the seller closing costs.
Correct, that's the intent.
I think we need to write that, so it's unclear, so it's clear what that is. And finally, Carol, I totally appreciate the 75-25 split. Thank you for investigating the 7:30 split. I understand, but I'm okay with 75-25. I would really prefer putting this into a motion for review, and I'd love to hear what other council members say. You know, after, Carol, you've actually completed your work and full review of the entire package. I think we're making progress, but we've still got some open pieces that we would love to see. I know, speaking for myself, I would love to see before putting it through a motion. Could I have other thoughts?
Other folks? So I think the idea is, are we ready tonight, or we need to give it just a touch more time? Other,
So can I just I'll give a little input on that point, that I think yeah, we do have these attachments that are not ready. I'm working from the sample of, or the model restrictive covenants to get that finally developed, but I have a little ways to go. And so those are not finished, and I think, and staff can speak to this more than I maybe, there are some advantages in this case to getting people started to try to get this done, but yeah, clearly the documents are not complete at this point. Some of this, much of what's been brought up today, and that completion could be done under the motion, but they are not ready at this point to be finally signed.
all right, so comments from other folks. Vice Mayor Hardy?
Thank you. So hearing the city attorney say that, I guess I'm kind of similar where Caroline is. I prefer that we defer this. It sounds like it's very, very close. I appreciate staff's hard work and rolling up of sleeves. And as much as I want to see this program up and going, I think that these details are important. So the version, for example, that's posted online for the public right now still reflects 10% and not the new 9.5% based on the recent turn. And so obviously we're still trading documents up until 3 o'clock this afternoon. So I feel better knowing that we did a final polish and walkthrough of all the concerns, the new points that Caroline brought up. I was glad to see, for example, Cindy, one of the new things you mentioned in the email at 3 o'clock was that we are clarifying that we are going to engage kind of essentially a buyer's agent to look for kind of off-market units so that before they hit the market, the city's not competing. And I know typically what happens is a seller pays for those fees, but I want to be crystal clear that the 9.5% is all we're paying. We're not going to pay any more. So if those agents who are working on behalf of the city are looking for units before they hit the market, I'd like to see language in there that we're not compensating them. So that's an important detail, I think, that we need to include. Also on the 9.5% of Caroline's questions about what it applies to, does that also apply to those carrying costs?
That's one language sort of in the devil's in the details to make sure we're both clear on what that is covering and not covering, because the intent is not to double dip.
Yep. Okay, so let's get clear on that. And then finally, I know that sounds like we were thinking through the 99-year versus a permanent deed restriction. And given that we're thinking 99-year already looks like permanent, unless there's like a legal issue why we can't make it a permanent restrictive covenant, I guess.
So I will mention that what's in the model of restrictive covenants is 99 years. And what it says is that at the end of the 99-year period, the homeowner can either agree to another 99-year covenant or pay to the city the difference between the market price at the time and the base price, so that the city would at that point get the proceeds. So I think what that does is makes it effectively permanent while still being for 99 years, which I think is better in order to protect from some claim that you can't have a permanent one. And that seems to be the standard way these operate, but it becomes in effect permanent, or else the city would have its money back. And I think that may be the useful model to use that I will keep in there as I develop the restrictive covenants.
That's an important detail. I thought it was just 99 years, or you kind of get it at that price. And so that's important. So I'd support that. But obviously, again, we need to think through those. So I guess with all those factors in mind, I would support deferring it another, I guess, turn until we meet again to make sure that Carol's had ample time. All the details, the version that's posted is the final version. I do think we are pretty close. So thank you, Cindy, especially for stepping into this and working hard on it.
Ms. Hiscott, do you have a comment?
I'm in agreement.
All right, Mr. Snyder?
Question from staff. When do you think, and City Attorney, when do you think we should schedule this? What's the earliest date that you feel you can present the final documents? And of course, respond to council issues.
I will need to defer to Carol's workload. My recommendation request is defer it to a time certain on July 11th, so we keep all parties, including our partners, focused, and because I know there's a need and we're ready to go. Virginia Housing's a little anxious for us to get this going too, so I don't want concern over expending grant dollars, but part of it's a workload in the next 2 weeks and a holiday.
I think we can get there. I think the agreement itself, I appreciate that people have raised some clarification items, and I think, but that can be done pretty quickly, and then the restrictive covenants, I can put some focus on those, and so I think we can probably get it back here.
July 11th then. Question, the Deputy City Manager, you mentioned the Virginia Housing Agency. Are we jeopardizing their participation by delaying it until the 11th?
By 2 weeks, I don't think so, and that's partly why I asked for a time certain, because your motion would show that there's a date, it's not
Okay.
open-ended.
And I don't mind moving the delay, but if you get the word that we have to move more quickly, I wouldn't even mind an emergency, a meeting of the council if we have to in order to preserve that partnership, which I think is fundamental. So, thanks.
All right, given that, do we have a motion?
Could I ask a question?
I have a question too. Good.
I just, before we get down the road, I should know this by now, but I don't. The objective of this is home ownership, affordable home ownership, but it's on a distributed model, right? We're not just looking at the list of an Exhibit 2 of the NHP candidate possible properties. We're not focused on any particular part of town that we're going to be trying to buy and make home ownerly affordable. This program is not aimed in that direction, is that right?
It is market-driven, so we are not targeting one specific community as we are with the other Amazon grant for redevelopment. So it will be based on where units come on the market, what are in the sales price, and then we can align income. So there are natural areas which will come up where there's single-family attached condos, smaller, older, single-family detached, but less likely. So we're not intending to target an area, but just by the nature of the housing sales price, there may be some more predominantly in one neighborhood than another.
But it would be market incidental if they,
It's intended to be scattered, but it's market-driven.
okay, thanks, thank you.
Ms. Conley?
Just a question about the realtors that would be helping us or working with us. Are we, like, as Letty pointed out, they're not going to be paid by us. How will that work? Are we just sending a general call for realtors? If you have a place, let us know?
That's part of it in informal, but also NHP will more proactively reach out and talk to them and try to get ahead of before something goes fully on the market. So try to be there when it's coming soon. That intent would be as part of their developer fee, what they're getting to administer this program.
And someone could come forward without a realtor as well, correct?
Correct.
If someone had a property they wanted to sell,
If they hear about this program, which of course we're going to do a lot of.
they could reach
community-
out in that way as well.
Indeed.
And are we suggesting to NHP which realtors to use, or is this completely up to them?
We are not targeting anyone. There's a good list available. We do have some that have already reached out that just happen to be engaged and care about affordable housing, but we will not be steering to anybody particular, but.
And they
will-
can work with anybody that they want.
Correct.
Okay.
And then a lot of realtors that are tied to lenders who are VHDA, Virginia Housing Certified, are a likely grouping because they understand first-time home buyers and the special financing related to that. So I'm sure there's targeted skill sets, but we will message broadly.
Okay.
And we have had some already reach out.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, do we have a motion?
Motion to defer adoption of TR 22-23 until July 11th.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
Any public comment? Seeing none, the matter is closed to the public. Madam Clerk?
Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leanne?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
And Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
Thank you, Council. The motion to defer carries.
All right, let's move on to the consent agenda. Is there any member of council who wishes to remove any item from the consent agenda? Seeing none, would someone like to make a motion?
May I remove the consent agenda package?
Second.
We have a motion and a second by Mr.
Second. Oh.
We have a third now. Ms. Hardy on the motion and Mr. Snyder on the second. I think Ms. Connolly on the third. But anyway, so let's go ahead and take that vote. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll call vote?
Ms. Connolly?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Hardy?
Yes.
Ms. Leanne?
Yes.
Ms. Shantz Hiscott?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes.
The motion carries. Thank you.
All right, let's move on to business not on the agenda. Any business not on the agenda? Ms. Hardy, Vice Mayor Hardy?
Thank you. We talked about the work plan at the beginning of the meeting, and I think at our mayor's meeting, maybe 2 cycles ago now, we talked about the work plan and GovOps, which is scheduled for tomorrow at noon. So all of council is invited to continue the discussion. Your favorite topic.
All
And
right.
it's my favorite topic.
All right, thank you. Let's move on. Are there any standing or regional committee or council liaison reports? Mr. Snyder?
Just a quick note that thanks to council's advice and guidance at our last meeting, the Transportation Planning Board did vote to move forward on the goal of reducing greenhouse gases by 50% by the year 2030. I think everyone realizes that's incredibly ambitious, but the work will move forward to try to meet that goal. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any council member, Mr. Duncan and Ms. Hiscott?
Thank you. Just a few things. First, I don't think I'm spilling the beans too prematurely to say that the NVTA's staff has recommended the North Washington Street project for funding in their next round. I think the full NVTA will vote on that soon. Mr. Snyder, I think?
Yes, on July 14, and the good news is the committee that you're on approved it unanimously. The committee that I'm on approved it unanimously, so it's poised to go, but let's not count it until it
That's
actually
right, right.
happens.
But I just wanted to, since I'm not sure if I'm going to be here July the 11th, just wanted to thank you and Ms. Hardy for your work. The public comment that was received by NVTA on our project was, again, leading all projects. It was very impressive. And that does, count. And I know the project is, it's sort of hard to get your head around. It's not that bad right now, but it could be much better. And we could do more for pedestrians and cyclists. And it really does have the potential down the road to open up that end of the city to, the East Falls Church Metro Station in a way that is sort of forbidding right now to try to walk from East Falls Church down North Washington. Anyway, thanks to you all. The Economic Development Committee normally would be scheduled to meet again on July 28th, but that conflicts with the VML Economic Community and Economic Development Committee meeting that day. Some of us are involved in that. So I'm proposing that we move the EDC meeting to August the 4th and have a combined July-August meeting to give staff a bit of a break. So no meeting in July, and the August meeting would be August 4th. Hope that's okay with the members and with staff. If so, then I'd like to try to get that advertised, the postponement of the July 28th meeting to August 4th. I recommend to everyone, if you get a chance, to listen to the recording of the Budget Committee meeting, which Ms. Connolly chaired last Friday. One of the more interesting Budget Committee meetings that I can remember listening to, and I've listened to a good many. Apart from specific numbers, it was really more a discussion of the philosophy of how schools and city government, general government work to produce a budget every year process and philosophy and so forth. Anyway, it was really a good discussion from all sides, and I recommend that you spend an hour listening to it. Would help you set yourself up for what's coming down the road in the next budget cycle. I think, thanks for the Pride crosswalk painting. Nice. In front of City Hall. Ms. Hardy and her hard-working crew. And just wanted again to raise a flag, have us keep looking for the assessor's situation as the summer goes on, progress that the assessor's office is making in working through the case of folks who filed petitions, and also any further discussion about whether the library could stay open a little longer on Sunday afternoons than it does now. I remain interested in that as a topic. And the 75th birthday of the city. Let's not forget I think August the 16th is starts the beginning of the year of celebrating the 75th anniversary of the city's founding as the city of Falls Church as opposed to the town of Falls Church. Thanks.
Ms. Hiscott?
Yes, just a couple of things. One, I just wanted to mention that I'm speaking with Lieutenant Lancaster about a possible gun take-back or buyback program. There are lots of details to be ironed out, but he's done a lot of research. Currently, the city does take guns from individuals or businesses for destruction, but this would just be an event to continue some of the work that's already done by our police force, and just put a highlight on what we can do locally, what we do currently have authority to handle. But there are many issues that are layered in there, but I just wanted to put that out into the community. That's something that we're looking at and working on, is what we can do to help with this situation in the country right now. And then I just wanted to mention that hopefully in our celebrations of 75 years of a city that we, acknowledge some of the darker years of our history and concurrently with celebrating, just to mark how far we've come in a lot of areas, like race relations since the start. I think it's great to highlight where we are and make sure that we acknowledge where we have been in the past in that celebration too. Thank you.
All right. Ms. Conley?
So to follow up on Mr. Duncan's comments about the Budget and Finance Committee meeting, there are two documents coming out of that meeting that I will share with the rest of council as soon as they're ready. One was a very candid review from all the members of the Budget and Finance Committee that include general government staff, school staff, city council members, and school board members about what went right and what went wrong and what were opportunities for improvement in the 2023 budget process. And then looking at the revenue sharing agreement, what has worked there, what changes do we think need to be made, and then also a history of that revenue sharing agreement, where it came from, how it exists, why it exists, and how we can make changes. So all those documents are being worked on, and I will share them with all of you. And as Mr. Duncan said, it would be a good use of your time. It's less than an hour, the meeting is, to watch the meeting and just hear the conversation, because it was a very good conversation.
All right. Unless there are any other council member comments, let's move on to the minutes of April 25th, 2022.
Mr. Mayor, I would move to adopt the minutes of the meeting of April 25th, 2022 as presented.
First, wow. Do we have a second?
Didn't see anything.
Quick second it while there are no corrections.
I know, I looked through it
Second.
pretty carefully. It was well done minutes.
All right.
Interesting to read the things that we all say.
Okay.
And Mr. Shirazi, too. I see he's there.
All right, so do we have a motion and a second? We do indeed. Let's, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions, the ayes have it. Any other business anyone would like to
I just
transact?
want to note that I will be asking for permission to participate remotely in the July 11th meeting. I'm pretty confident I'm going to be down in Tennessee with my dad. And if there are plans for walking tours and so forth, obviously, I'd love to participate in them. And I know others have vacation and plans not to be around, so maybe we could just circulate alternate dates and take a poll of what date would be most likely to get all of us there.
Yes, I'll be asking to participate electronically on the 11th as well. I'll be on vacation in North Carolina, but I'll be online.
All right. Okay, sounds good. Anything else? Any final words before we adjourn? No mayor's meeting on Wednesday. All right, you guys ready? Let's do it. We're adjourned. Good evening.